If I said to you that Halo 3 ODST was my favourite game in the series, I'd be lying. But nevertheless, I still think its campaign, which deviates perhaps more than any other from the established Halo blueprint, has a whole lot to offer. I'm a huge fan of film noir, I'm a huge fan of jazz music, and as you may have already guessed, I'm a huge fan of Halo, which means while it may not be top of my list of entries into the series, I am still rather fond of it. After playing it through again recently, I also got to thinking about how I'd rank each of the game's missions, and over the course of this video, I'm going to take you through my list, starting with what I believe is ODST's worst mission and finishing with its very best. But before we begin, I must include a slight caveat. I will not be including Mombasa streets as part of this video. I enjoy the sections spent searching the city well enough, even if actually finding the items needed to progress the story can at times be a tad annoying. However, as they're not a Halo mission in the traditional sense, I think it would be unfair to include them as part of this list. If I did, I'd also end up gushing on for hours and hours about what a great idea having an AI subtly guiding you through the city is, which I think I'll save for another occasion. Right, on to the rankings themselves. Unfortunately, there always has to be one mission which finishes at the back of the pack, and on this occasion I have put Tiari Plaza in 8th place. Honestly, with this game more than any other in the series, I really struggled to decide on an order for the missions I'm not such a fan of, as there's no levels in Halo 3 ODST that I would consider to be downright awful. There's no the library, Cortana, the High Charity or similar, so in a way I feel somewhat bad for the first few missions on this list. Putting my guilt to one side, Tiari Plaza is a mission I found really exciting when I first played ODST back in 2009, but I'd also say it's lost a good deal of its impact in the years since upon repeat playthroughs. Tiari Plaza was the first time I really felt like I was playing a Halo game set in a real place, where real human people lived, and at the time of the game's release, that was pretty blooming exciting. Up until ODST released, I'd never felt like there had been a really good mission set in a human city in a Halo game, with Halo 2's attempts not living up to the lofty expectations I'd developed after watching the incredible gameplay demo Bungie revealed during E3 2003, and here I was finally getting a taste of what I'd always dreamed of. The problem is that once that initial feeling of excitement has dissipated, what you're left with is a mission which is about as by the numbers as you could get. You take on some Covenant, you round out proceedings by battling a pair of hunters, and beyond the setting, which is admittedly great, it's nothing you won't have seen a good few times before. On a more positive note, I love that the engineers are introduced nice and early to build intrigue. For many who hadn't played Halo Wars, this would have been the first time they encountered them, and I also want to give a big shout out to Buck as a character. This may be the first proper mission in ODST, but even at this early stage, it becomes quite clear that he's the star of the show, and it's no surprise he's since become a fan favourite with a vastly expanded role in the series. Blasting its way into 7th place on my list is Kazingo Boulevard. Kazingo Boulevard doesn't do anything particularly badly, but neither does it really stand out in any way. Its most memorable moment is by far the tank sequence, which is sandwiched in between two on-foot encounters, but it's hard to get overly excited by a section that pales in comparison to some of the more intense vehicular sections featured in Bungie's earlier titles. That being said, while it may not match up in terms of sheer scale or spectacle, navigating a Scorpion through New Mombasa's city streets while engaging in short-range combat is different enough that it always keeps me engaged, and Bungie also do a good job of using the city setting to vary enemy placement to help differentiate the section from those featured in earlier titles. What prevents the mission from ranking any higher for me are the ending set piece and the lack of story. Given that most of your time in Kazingo Boulevard is spent in a tank, I would rather its final encounter also require the use of a Scorpion to help it further stand apart from other missions in Halo 3 ODST, and with regards to its story, Mickey's Tale feels like one designed to simply keep things moving forward, with little of consequence happening during its runtime. Like Tiari Plaza before it, I would describe it as very vanilla. It's not amazing, it's not terrible, it's just sort of there. Considering the mission which precedes it in my ranking, you might notice something of a pattern emerging, with another vehicle-heavy mission landing in spot number 6. This time it's Uplift Reserve, and despite it not being one of the frontrunners on my list, I nonetheless always have a good time playing through this Dutch-centric level. Starting with a Spartan laser is obviously awesome, and taking on more wraiths than you can shake a stick at alongside several Warthogs is great fun. There's also a good variety of other vehicles thrown into the mix. The collapse of the orbital elevator is an awesome sight to behold, and the mission can concluding with a vehicle jump certainly doesn't hurt it either. What lets Uplift Reserve down is that if you weren't paying attention, you could easily mistake it for Tsavo Highway from Halo 3. That's no bad thing necessarily. Tsavo Highway is after all a cracking level, but it does stand out to me because of that, as I'd argue pretty much every other mission in ODST feels unique to a certain degree, while Uplift Reserve is in my view much more of a retread. This is completely understandable to some extent, as the game was made by a smaller team and there will have had to have been compromises as a result, but as mentioned, the fact that so many others in ODST managed to stand out in one way or another meant it was always going to struggle to reach a higher place on my ranking. In 5th position is Oni Alpha Site, a mission I really enjoy in large part because of how bleak it is. Mombasa Streets does a good job of evoking a similar tone from the game's very beginning, but I personally feel like a lot of the actual missions in Halo 3 ODST leading up to Oni Site Alpha are quite triumphant in tone, to the extent that at times it almost feels like you're still controlling a Spartan. As battle-hardened as many of the ODSTs are, a nice bit of peril was absolutely necessary to ensure they felt a bit more human than Master Chief and his cybernetically enhanced chums. Events begin with you fleeing the Covenant and blowing up the bridge you've just crossed to slow their advance, and from there you'll slowly be pushed further and further back until you're eventually forced to bunker down inside the site itself, ready to engage wave after wave of enemies. Other than the ending sequence during which you fight your way to the rooftop for extraction, you're always on the back foot, and the final reward for your endeavours is to watch the site you work so hard to defend be reduced to smithereens. From a gameplay standpoint, there's nothing particularly spectacular going on during Oni Alpha Site, and I'd guess some might think I'm being too soft on it because of that, but the way the mission plays out, combined with its tone and overall pacing, means it just creeps in ahead of some of the other levels I've spoken about so far. Flying high as the first mission in the top half of my list and taking up the number 4 spot is Kikowani Station, a level that in my view has some very high highs combined with some very low lows. When it comes to atmosphere, this mission is top notch. It's somber and moody, and one might argue also rather beautiful, with the lights from buildings, gunfire and vehicles cutting through the darkness while you survey your surroundings from the cockpit of a Banshee. Given how impressive it looks even to this day, I must confess that playing Kikowani Station always makes me wish the game had a few more missions set during the night time. The city is an interesting location no matter the time of day, and exploring the dark Mombasa streets during the free roam sections is certainly fun, but the combination of gorgeous aesthetics and set pieces found here are definitely in my view a cut above both. The Banshee sections provide a decent amount of entertainment, and I really like how powerful the vehicle is in ODST. You can practically hover in one place without moving whatsoever, which makes taking down the Covenant a breeze, other than the Scarab at the end of the mission. The Scarab is an interesting encounter to finish on for sure, and I've nothing truly negative to say about it, but it is perhaps a little more static than some of the others encountered in the series, and doesn't require too much strategy to eventually bring down. The other problem with Kikowani Station is that it does feature a bit of padding and repetition in the form of the doors that need to be unlocked at different moments. It's nothing too egregious, but I definitely could have done without them, as they break up the pace of the mission a bit too much for me without really offering a whole lot in return. I've a feeling my next choice may be a tad controversial, because coming in third and taking up a spot on my Halo 3 ODST podium is Data Hive. Allow me to first acknowledge the bad parts of this mission, because there are one or two, and for some people they will be big issues. Firstly, you might find the environment somewhat repetitive, with a lot of corridors and rooms you encounter later being repeated multiple times. And second, there are a lot of drones which need to be dealt with during this mission too, and if you're anything like me, you might not enjoy fighting them all too much. However, Data Hive also gets a lot of things right, and some of them will perhaps mean more to me than they will to others, as I really enjoy when Halo throws a few darker moments into its missions. You get some very light environmental storytelling in the form of the bodies littering the various areas you traverse, but it's the environments themselves that really tickle my pickle. Every step feels like it's taking you deeper and deeper into uncharted territory, and the further you descend, the colder the level's colour palette becomes. There are multiple light scares to keep you on your toes, such as these drones bursting from a hole in front of you, and another set sleeping on the ceiling above you after a fall, and in general, I can't get enough of how inhospitable and claustrophobic the facility feels. Add in some decent story beats with Dare and the discovery of Virgil, your friendly neighbourhood engineer, and what you get is a mission which I reckon some will love, and some will no doubt hate. Personally, I love it. Picking up a well-deserved silver medal and second place in my rankings is Halo 3 ODST's final mission, Coastal Highway. Up until now, I've tried to be as balanced as possible and explain clearly what I both like and dislike about each mission. As I said towards the beginning of the video, I don't think the game really has any terrible missions, and as a result, I think how people would rank them will vary much more than other Halo titles, hence the need to provide a clear rationale. And while that may have been the case up to this point, from here on out there's going to be a lot more praise and a lot less criticism, as both Coastal Highway and the mission I've chosen as my number one I think have fewer flaws and are generally a little ahead of the pack. Coastal Highway may start out slower than you might expect for the game's final mission, with a fairly standard battle through the streets alongside Buck, Dare and Virgil, your first port of call, but once you arrive at the titular highway, things really begin to ramp up. Bungie gives everything a real sense of scale, and events continue to increase in intensity quite quickly from this point onwards, as you take to the wheel of a Warthog to provide cover for Dare. Covenant cruisers and an extraordinary number of Banshees fly overhead, while at ground level you take on just about every enemy you can think of, and soon even find yourself once again taking control of a Scorpion. Enormous Covenant ships continue to appear in the skies above the city, a Scarab makes its presence known, and soon enough you'll find yourself penned in, desperately trying to defend your final position until help eventually arrives. Coastal Highway has more spectacle than nearly every other mission in the game combined, and is a fittingly intense affair which helps make the eventual reunion of Alpha 9 Squad all the more exciting. While there are some really good final missions in other Halo titles, there's never been one I felt was the best level in its respective game. Coastal Highway may have also missed out on doing that by little more than a hair's breadth, but it is without doubt the closest any of them have come so far. And so here we are, we finally arrive at the mission with the mostest, the one I think is the very best ODST has to offer, and that mission is NMPD HQ. For me, this is not only the best mission in the game, but also the best involving a sniper rifle we've seen in any Halo title so far. It isn't a particularly exciting level visually, with most of the different areas you traverse prior to the ending set piece looking fairly similar, and it's also surprisingly narrow for a level which revolves around the sniper rifle. However, everything else in NMPD HQ is absolutely top-notch. Its encounter design is extremely well thought out, and the level features a very smooth difficulty curve, which means each consecutive firefight feels manageable but also more challenging than the last. The dialogue featured is light and snappy, which is very appropriate considering the pace of the mission never really slows down for more than a few seconds. And of course, it also includes a fantastic final standoff as you cross a makeshift bridge before engaging in one of my favourite encounters in the entire game. Romeo, Buck, Dutch and Mickey find themselves together again as the music swells and a near insurmountable number of Covenant arrive on the scene. Set out in the open against the backdrop of the ruined city, it's a high-tempo brawl between you and your enemies, and I think it works so well because it clashes so violently with what occurred during the first half of the mission. There you were taking out foes from a distance with your trusty sniper rifle, whereas at the end of NMPD HQ you've barely got any breathing room at all, with it at times feeling like there's almost no room to maneuver. It's not the mission with the most variety, nor is it the most interesting aesthetically, but what you do get with NMPD HQ is a tightly designed, perfectly paced 20-minute slice of Halo action, which is an absolute joy to play and never outstays its welcome. Thanks for taking the time to watch the video, boys, girls and Spartans. If you had a good time, do consider subscribing to the channel and let me know how your list would look, and hopefully I'll see you all again soon.